Story number 1. I saw a few in Mexico. The most memorable one was the first one I saw while I lived there. I was cleaning out some house with some buddies of mine, and a guy was walking down the block. We heard gunshots. I looked out the window, and there was the same guy laying on the sidewalk. A black pickup truck sped by, and I think there were 4 guys on the back, all with bandanas covering their faces, all with guns in their hands. The thing that struck me was how they all looked younger than me. I was 22 at the time. According to the paper that was released right after, he was from out of town. Likely they just mistook him as someone else. He was 17 years old. His blood was left on the streets for days, and one of my friends said he heard 14 shots. But I only heard 6. I have the whole experience written down as it was so foreign to me. This was up in Altamirano. I used to stay up late at night trying to think of what kind of life would lead these guys to do a drive-by like that. I also wonder about that 17-year-old. I'm sure he just had family and he was just visiting there. Story number 2. I saw my neighbor murdered, cold-blooded, on my driveway. My neighbor was helping his lady friend escape a very abusive relationship. Lady's ex hunted her down like a dog. Saw my neighbor walking back home with her after they went to get food for his kids. Then I heard 3 loud pops, and I ran outside to find her screaming and, well, him completely out of his shoes and in my driveway. He had a hole near his chest big enough to put my fist in it. There was nothing I could do to save him except sit with him and hold his hands while I prayed for him to pass quickly. I'll never forget that night. 48 hours later, I broke the lease on my house and moved in with my boyfriend who lives in a much safer place. So, I just want to say this. You were an awesome neighbor and a wonderful father, Kane. You're certainly missed. Story 3. I was at a pub 2 years ago. There was a large group out front arguing, then a guy just got blindsided and punched in the side of the head. The guy that hit him sprinted off into the darkness. The guy went down and, well, he never got up. His wife watched it happen and was trying to get him to wake up while the fighting and arguing continued. 30 minutes go by and the guy hasn't moved since he got punched. Bar staff has been doing CPR on him for 15 minutes before the emergency services finally arrived and continue. Turns out, he was brain dead on impact. They kept him alive somehow until the morning but turned life support off the following afternoon. The guy was 46. He was at his local bar and got killed. It's a really crappy thing to see. I'll never forget that night. The guy that hit him was 19. He got charged with murder, and he's in jail as we speak. Edit. Some people are wondering why he got charged with murder instead of manslaughter. Well, in Australia, we have a thing called coward punch laws. Basically, if you blindside someone or you king hit them, you get charged with murder. 8 years minimum. Personally, I believe he deserved a murder charge. Watching that man go limp and hit the ground and the attacker just running away was one of the most sickening things I've ever seen. He came up behind him, sucker punched the guy above his ear. He had no idea it was coming. Pretty much instantly made him brain dead in front of his wife, so no sympathy for the attacker here. Story 4. So I was walking home one day and I saw a couple arguing. The dude started walking off away from the girlfriend's car, and apparently she was not happy with that. She proceeded to get into the car and wait about 5 minutes till he was way off down the sidewalk. I was walking on the opposite side of the road as him, and all of a sudden I see a blur as he goes flying like a rocket. She must have been going at least 60 miles per hour. He flew through the air and hit a tree. Died instantly. The woman then screamed out the window at his body and drives away. There was blood smeared all over the crumpled hood, and I'll never forget the sight of his contorted body at the base of the tree almost folded in half. I had to talk to the police, and within an hour, they caught her going to a car wash, trying to clean the blood and chunks off the hood and grill of her car. I was 16 years old at the time. For those of you concerned, thank you. I actually did have to see a therapist for a few months after. I'm doing very well right now. However, I don't think I'll ever fully get over it. It's one of those things that always just sticks with you. Story number 5. Well, I was working at this skating rink in the late 80s, early 90s. I was in my late teens and it was Sunday's soul night session. Very crowded, about 600 that night. As we were trying to clear the parking lot after closing, a gunfire erupted between two gangs. Everybody hit the deck while the shootout happened, and a 12-year-old girl panicked while coming from inside and starts running. She ran directly into the crossfire and took one to the head about 6 feet away from me. Killed instantly. There's like an article about it, and they said the rink itself is a magnet for problems. I've seen people die in combat since, but being a little girl is what haunts me the most about that death. Story number 6. Security guard here in state of Alabama. I have no idea about other states or some federal laws, but security guard here, both armed and unarmed, me, are never touched or detained unless we perceive the individual to be a threat to life for somebody else or ourselves. A situation is severely ducked if a security guard actually has to do anything physically to somebody. That would basically mean they've already given an aggressive move. As for shooting someone in the back, at least I don't think that's allowed in Alabama. Here we have laws that state someone is out of your house or building or property, it's no longer considered defense to kill them. I'm not trying to be a lawyer in the comment section. This is just what was explained to me in my training. So it's very rare that you see a security guard actually kill someone. That's why my story is so unique. Well, I was on mid-shift. It was about 7 p.m. and I was with my partner, Dale. He's barely ever even fired his gun. He doesn't even like to go to the range with me. So imagine his surprise when there's an armed robbery at the bank, right across the street from where we're patrolling in this crowded area. I guess something must have gone wrong with the robbery and they had 2 held by gunpoint. Long story short, SWAT team arrived, every single person arrived that you could possibly imagine. It looked like they were protecting the president. However, me and my partner were basically on scene, just standing there with our hands in our pocket, not sure what to do, when all of a sudden one bullet is fired. It sounded like an absolute rocket going off. Turns out it was a sniper from the rooftop. Instantly took out both of the armed robberies. 2 shots. Sounded like 1. I look over at the scene and I see the robbers dead on the ground, and well, that was a pretty scary day. But, yeah, even amongst an armed robbery, Dale never had to fire a bullet. Best darn partner I've ever had. Story 7. I was 16 driving down the highway in the passenger seat of my mother's car. About 3:30 p.m., traffic came to a complete halt, and we were in the right-hand lane. So, as we were creeping along, a semi-truck appears on the shoulder of the highway. The door swung wide open, and as we moved past, there's a trail of blood, all down the doorstep onto the concrete and then leading maybe 20 feet further down the road. As we crept further, the trail of blood ended with a man lying face up, completely covered. There was no police, no ambulance there yet, and this was on a highway in the suburbs of a major metropolitan area in the United States, so plenty of people saw before the scene was taken hold of by emergency services. Turns out the truck driver had a partner with him. They got into an argument and the passenger stabbed the driver like a dozen times. Then he escaped. The murderer was caught about an hour and a half away. One stayed over 2 days later. I have to imagine that I was about 5 minutes behind the trucks pulling over because the police can be in the spot in about 30 seconds. Being the passenger seat in the right lane of the highway, I was about 10 feet away from the body. What an absolutely haunting image. Story 8. A drunken man was pushed down some stairs by the bouncer. Unfortunately, the drunk man was unable to catch himself and instead spun around and landed on the pavement with the back of his head making first contact. He was alive for a little while but quickly succumbed to his wound and arrested on the pavement. He was declared dead 15 minutes later and ED, after being transported by an ambulance. There was no CCTV or clear evidence of malicious intent that would hold up in court, and the man was known as a drunk, and he had no friends or family. It was just ruled an accidental death. I had to walk past that spot most days going to work and will never forget his face. The look of mystified horror, followed by the glassy-eyed, slack-jawed expression that comes with death. I was the medic that transported the man. I was by his side from start till declaration. One of the most visceral experiences of my career thus far. Story number 9. Well, I was riding my bike to work when I witnessed this attack. I was the first person to approach, and I was sure this woman was going to die. I heard the truck before I looked, and I watched as she run over completely with the truck. I watched as both sets of tires ran her over. It was as if it was the most horrible thing I've ever witnessed in my life. I was probably 100 feet away, or maybe a little less. And as soon as he pulled away, I had to have an internal argument with myself about approaching. Like, I didn't want to see a dead, mangled person up close, but if there was any chance she was still alive, I don't want her to be alone. It was probably only a few seconds, but it felt like forever, and then I went over. She was alive and conscious, so I tried to comfort her and start calling emergency services. But she only spoke Spanish, so I wasn't able to really communicate with her. Another woman had seen as well, and she came running over from across the street. She was able to come over and talk with her in Spanish while I called emergency help. I think she was able to help her call some family, since I think we were all uncertain if she'd make it or not. The ambulance showed up pretty quickly and stabilized her. After she was taken away, I went to work and tried not to think about it. I actually actively avoided learning anything about the story until now, because the uncertainty of whether she died or not allowed me to believe she was okay. I didn't want to know if she died. This post actually prompted to look up whether she lived or not, and this is the first time I've ever even tried looking up anything about that day. Well, I'm happy to say she made it, and I hope she's doing well. Seeing somebody try to kill someone absolutely changes your life. I don't think about that day every day, but it does definitely haunt me. Story 10. My then 18-year-old brother and his then 18-year-old wife lived next door to a family with a teenage son. She started an affair with that 17-year-old son. One day, the son barged into my brother's place and starts attacking him. I don't exactly know why, but the wife did not seem to want to move away with my brother to the army, or some dumb crap like that started it. My brother was packing and moving because he was leaving for the army, and he had pulled down a metal pole in the closet to make room for boxes. My brother grabbed that pole and used it to fight off the teen. The kid ran out bleeding, and my brother called my dad. We lived a few blocks down the street, and my dad jumped into action. He grabbed one of his hunting shotguns and some bird ammo, and he ran out the door to the car screaming for us to get emergency services number. My mom and I ran after him because we were clueless and wanted to see where he was headed to. My mother was on the phone with the cop, and they were dispatching the one cop that, we had in our town. We started running down the road to my brother's place because we saw Dad pull in. As we got close, we hear a gunshot and see my father and brother taking cover behind the car doors that they open to climb in and leave. Another gunshot goes off, and we can see it is not my dad firing. The teenager had run home next door and was bleeding out, and told his dad my brother was trying to kill him. His dad grabbed his handgun, saw my dad and brother leaving, and starts shooting. That's the gunfire Mom and I heard. Dumb us kept running towards my dad's car, and I saw my dad position his shotgun in the car window and fire one round. Then he and my brother climbed in the car and started driving back at us towards home. We all finally get together, and Dad says he shot the man in the stomach. Chaos breaks out on our street. Ambulance, cops, people. They take the other dad away to the hospital and my dad to custody. Within hours, we find out that the man has died. The birdshot hit his liver and he bled out. Turns out he was an alcoholic and his liver was not going to survive the trauma. My father was charged with murder, and we started receiving death threats. In the cover of night, we moved. We hid for days until my father was bonded out and ended up moving far, far away. Grand jury was convened and I had to testify to what I saw. After all the evidence and testimony was presented, my father was not charged because the grand jury decided it was self-defense. We never talk about what happened or anything, and things carry on as normal. That day is just forever burned into my memory. I want to add this. My dad never recovered from taking a man's life. Even though it wasn't intentional, he ended up getting on drugs, and well, after the church couldn't save him, we lost him to his demons in 2008. My brother's done well for himself, but he had his own battles that he fights daily. I'm not pro or anti-pro any laws. I just wish this had never happened because so many lives were changed that day. My brother divorced her after he left for the army and she's gone from our lives. Forever.